Hi everybody, and welcome to the webinar. We're introducing our continuous distribution toolkit, which you can get to by visiting cdtoolkit.org or by going to continuousdistribution.org. They both work. We'll start today with some background, clarifying some common terminology and concepts for continuous distribution, and then we'll go into a tour of the website itself. So first, let's go over some common terms and definitions that we use. So while mass campaigns generally occur every 3 years, continuous distribution involves channels of ITN distribution that deliver nets more frequently to households. These include ANC and EPI delivery, which we often call routine delivery. These are truly continuous as long as the stock supply is good, because those nets are available every month of the year. We also have health facility delivery, which might include curative care services or other types of net delivery to populations other than pregnant women and infants. They might include subsidized sales as well based at the health facility or other types of health facility distribution. Then we have school distribution, which is generally a yearly type of distribution, so it's less truly continuous, but also kind of like a little mini campaign. That involves distributing nets to school children in selected classes, selecting enough classes to achieve high levels of coverage within the community with ITNs. Then community-based distribution generally involves a community health worker or community agent acting as a coupon holder, identifying households that need new nets or responding to requests from those households, giving those households a coupon that they can then redeem at a health facility or other type of distribution point for a net within their community. And that tends to be more continuous and not so temporal. Then we have subsidized sales and full retail sales as well that are all encompassed in continuous distribution. So I want to illustrate two main approaches that countries are using or considering at the moment. So the first approach is illustrated here. And in the graphic down at the bottom, we start in 2016, and then the blue trapezoid that you see there is a mass campaign implemented in 2017. So in this approach, you're implementing mass campaigns every 3 years. You have your purple bar at the bottom with your continuous ANC and EPI distribution that occurs throughout. And then in between the campaigns, you have some level of school or community-based distribution that maintains high coverage with ITNs in the population in between the campaigns. So Ghana is an example of a place that's doing this right now. And then in the next slide, we have the other approach, which is currently being implemented by Tanzania. And this is a mass campaign in 2017 to scale up coverage quickly, and then followed by a full-scale continuous system. In Tanzania's case, they're using school distribution. So ANC and EPI, that purple bar is still there. That's still continuous. And then the year after the mass campaign, there's a smaller level, perhaps, of school distribution because you still have a lot of fresh nets from that mass campaign. But thereafter, you implement large-scale continuous distribution to maintain ownership and access without the mass campaigns. All right. So just kind of referring back to some of the recommendations about continuous distribution from WHO, this is the 2014 updated recommendations from WHO about achieving universal coverage with LLINs for malaria. And WHO says that in order to maintain universal coverage, countries should apply a combination of mass free distributions and continuous distributions through multiple channels, in particular antenatal and immunization services. Mass campaigns obviously are a good way to scale up coverage, but because of the gaps between campaigns that occur as a result of net loss and damage, we need additional ways to get nets into households. Continuous distribution channels, and in particular ANC and EPI, should be functional before, during, and after the mass campaigns so that there's no gap in universal access. And then later, in point number 7 in the document, WHO does refer to the option of moving away from mass campaigns. So where the national health systems have been strengthened to support continuous distribution systems through health facilities, opportunities to sustain coverage should be explored in the future for a gradual shift away from campaigns to distribute publicly funded LLINs. Also note that campaigns can be a backup plan, a plan B, as a supplementary measure, so that if coverage drops below a certain threshold and monitoring is needed to identify that threshold and to know whether you've reached it or not, you can implement a mass campaign to scale your coverage back up. All right, and just as a reminder, there's some inefficiency potentially in the current strategy. So here we have universal coverage campaigns illustrated in red. This is population access to ITN being illustrated. So it scales up with the universal coverage campaign, and then in the intervening years, the coverage drops down substantially, as opposed to a continuous system where ideally you would be maintaining a steady rate of coverage of access to ITNs over time. We are investigating through modeling work right now the cost effectiveness of doing this. What's the potential public health value of having that protection more consistently versus having those ups and downs over time. All right, so a few do's and don'ts before we get into the website tour itself. So, we do want to make sure that countries start implementing a continuous distribution channel within 12 months of the mass campaign so that coverage doesn't drop too far and then it's hard to catch back up with that coverage. We also recommend that countries do a thorough assessment of options for continuous distribution in their country and in their setting, including operational feasibility. So, what is the school system like? Is the Ministry of Education on board, or are they not on board? Are there opportunities to collaborate with other sectors? Are there enough community health workers with enough skills, with enough sort of management and supervision to be able to implement a community-based system? What are the logistics like? All kinds of operational feasibility questions, including from political all the way down to logistical considerations as part of that first stage of planning. What we don't want to do is scale up CD to a large scale and do mass campaigns, because that will definitely be too many nets. We don't want to use ANC nets for the campaign, taking them away from pregnant women, unless the country can pay them back quickly. This goes with the WHO recommendations. And if the country is having a really hard time implementing a successful mass campaign, it may not be a great time to switch to CD, which is new and has its own learning curves. So, CD is a good option. We are hopeful in many settings, but there are, we recognize that there are also a lot of settings where continuous distribution is maybe not going to work as well. So where ANC and EPI system is not functioning well, where the reordering and resupply and logistics and recording and reporting are not working very well at all, that's probably an indicator that the health system isn't strong enough to support a separate community or school-based distribution system. If there's a poorly functioning mass campaign, likewise, there are probably structural system issues with moving to a new set of distribution options. School distribution in particular is not going to work well if there's low enrollment. So checking the enrollment figures as part of this operational feasibility assessment is important. Community distribution, likewise, is not going to work well in divided or volatile communities. And if NMCP and donors are not aligned, then it may be tough to agree on a strategy on the way forward. All right, so just to illustrate in pictorial fashion for the two main channels that we use for continuous distribution. So school-based distribution generally works by distributing nets to students in selected classes, often every other class in a full-scale continuous distribution system, or 2 or 3 classes if school distribution is being implemented to keep up coverage between mass campaigns. So school, a teacher with a red hat, and then we have class 1, class 2, class 3, and class 4, and class 5. Class 1, 3, and 5 are getting nets in year 1. And if you follow the blue guys in class 1, as we click through, they will age into class 2 in year 2, and they won't get a net. And then in year 3, they'll be in class 3, and again, that class of students will get a net again. Those nets go back into the household, they get used. Some of them get reassigned or given away to friends, family, neighbors. They replace other nets. The idea is that we're getting nets into the community for use and they're distributed where needed. So for community-based distribution, it's a little bit different. This involves our lovely little lady over here near the blue house. She's going to go to the community health worker or community agent who's got a coupon over here at the red house with the red hat. Community agent gives her this lovely orange coupon after verifying that she meets eligibility criteria for receiving a new net. And that might be, she's pregnant, or she is newly married, or she has a net that's torn, or she just doesn't have enough nets. The country can develop its community eligibility criteria. Then our lovely lady takes her coupon over to the health facility or other distribution point where the nets are stocked. And she turns in her coupon to the health facility where it's kept for recording and reporting purposes. And she takes her net home to her house to use. And so we'll take you through the slides of the screenshots of the CD toolkit. You can get to this toolkit by going to either cdtoolkit.org or continuousdistribution.org. And this is the front page. We have up at the top, I'm not sure if people can see the pointer here, but along the top there's a navigation bar. So there's a home tab, the background tab, a section on choosing a CD channel, and step-by-step CD implementation. We also have some resources organized into by country, so country examples, and resources organized into categories of stages of distribution, which we'll go through. So we'll take you through this, and bear with us because they are screenshots, so we can't show you everything all at once. So here we are up in the background section, if you want to follow the navigation bar along the very top. And this is the using the CD toolkit section. So we have some text on the purpose of the online guide and the toolkit, the intended audience. And within the background section and on the left side, there's always a navigation column here, which allows you to go through that section one bit at a time or to click around and find what you need. So there are key concepts and terms where you can look up your acronyms and your terminology, maintaining CD during mass campaigns, talking about universal coverage and what that means, and a sort of introduction overview of continuous ITN distribution. So going through into the choosing a CD channel, this is really the first step before implementation. And there are 3 steps within this section. So you want to make sure that you review the options and consider the implications of those options. So the 3-step process here is first to do a stakeholder workshop to model out potential contributions of your continuous channels in countries. And we use the NetCalc tool to model those out. Most PMI countries have done one of these over the past several years, either under the Networks project or with Vectorworks. These are generally shorter workshops to kind of introduce folks to the concepts of CD and how they might work together to achieve universal coverage. Step 2 is the field assessment, which is the feasibility assessment to assess the operational feasibility of your potential channels and kind of ground truth those to see if they really would work. And then the last step in this first section is a stakeholder meeting to discuss those results of the field assessment and to finalize the implementation guidelines. And I think we'll show you next a field assessment. So in the field and feasibility assessment section, we have some objectives for the feasibility assessment. We have outputs of the field feasibility assessment, which is generally a report, a document or a presentation, a finalized strategy for continuous distribution with the vision of how that works together, which channels, how many classes, if it's school distribution, etc. And then a draft of implementation guidelines along with PowerPoint slides that summarize the information. I think we have, no. We have, sorry, going back a second. In each of these sections, you can't see because they're at the bottom, but there are sample tools and sample terms of reference links to other reports and outside resources. So here in this section, we have a guide on how to do a feasibility assessment, which has been very useful for the teams going out to figure out how to do that. So each section has its own resources, and then those are summarized at the end in the resources tab as well. So once that initial step of choosing the CD channel, doing the feasibility assessment, and kind of finalizing that implementation strategy are done, then we move into the step-by-step CD implementation section. There are 12 steps. The first ones here along the left are listed, and as you scroll down, there's a little bit more information about that. So the idea is that some of these steps happen concurrently. They're not all in a concrete sequence necessarily, but we've broken them out so that you can find what you need for the particular stage that you are at more readily. So the 12 steps are first getting your coordination committee together. These follow essentially the steps outlined in the AMP toolkit for mass campaigns. They're largely similar in scope to those. Developing a timeline and a budget, quantifying the net need given the channels that you're implementing in your population, creating a logistics and supply chain plan and preparing for implementation, planning your accountability and supervision activities, planning your SBCC activities to ensure that people are aware of the system and know what to do, developing your M&E plan and tools, developing the training plan and doing the trainings, and then moving into actual distribution and issuing, getting the nets to the sites, getting the nets to the beneficiaries, and then analyzing the data and adjusting your plan based on those findings. And so for each of these steps in the toolkit itself, we have resources, sample budgets, sample timelines, sample transportation plans, and all of that, which we may be able to show you a little bit later. Yes, so here we are in the develop a timeline section. So we have objectives for this step. We have outputs, the chronogram with the point people listed for each task, the activities that are involved. So you need to plan for a meeting to prepare the timeline. You need to review the planning checklist, preparing the draft timeline for further review and finalization. Each of these little plus signs will expand for additional information and resources. So we also have channel-specific guidance for each of these steps, because developing a timeline for health facility distribution, which is continuous throughout the year, is going to be a little bit different than, say, for a school distribution that is once annually and has a slightly different timeline. We have example chronograms, so here from Tanzania, rollout for health facility-based distribution, and other sample chronograms developed as templates from existing examples. And here we've expanded in the timeline section the guidance plus sign. And so you can see that there's some guidance and recommendations about what you need to think about and as you move through this step. And so for school-based distribution recommendations, specific school timeline considerations, you don't want to plan your school distribution during vacation period or exam period. You need to ensure that the education personnel are closely involved in the timeline planning up front and can guide you. And then, where possible, where we have them, as much as possible, we have links to the other guides that are relevant for that particular recommendation. So here we have a link to the school-based distribution guide, which has a lot more detail on all of those issues. Likewise, for the social and behavior change communication plan and getting implementation done, we have some objectives of that step, the outputs of the step, a list of activities that you would need to consider in this step, and then some channel-specific guidance for SBCC activities that can be expanded. And here it's expanded, so that guidance has been expanded. You see more bullet points. And so there's really a lot of rich information in the toolkit. We've tried to make it so that it is accessible, it's not overwhelming, you can click to expand where you need more information, but you don't have to scroll through a ton of bullet points to get to where you need to go. And then the examples down here, some posters from community distribution in Zanzibar, and some BCC materials from Nigeria that were used in their school and community pilots. And again, some BCC recommendations specifically for school distribution about, is malaria already covered in the curriculum? If not, then you can develop a document based on the sample one to do some more malaria messaging as part of that school distribution. All right, so the step-by-step CD implementation section is dense. There's a lot of information there. And sometimes you just want to go and see what the country that you are working in is doing, or a neighboring country that's is working on CD, and see what they've done. So in the country examples tab up at the top, you click that and you get a list of countries in a sub-menu along the top here. So Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, South Sudan, Senegal, and Tanzania. We are adding more countries. We also welcome additional materials and examples for those who want to send them along. We're happy to add them into the toolkit and make them a part of these resources. So just as an example, we have a number of documents related to Tanzania. Under networks, we did a couple lessons in brief about the Tanzania National Voucher Scheme, which unfortunately is no more, but also making targeted subsidies fast and flexible. The e-voucher under the TNVS, also no more. But if you're looking for samples and how that was done, you can get some more information on that. And then any resources that are tagged with as coming from Tanzania will appear here as we add them. So you can search by country in that section. And then in the resources section, and here we're still trying to figure out the best way to organize these, but essentially for the moment, we have guides, which are overall kind of comprehensive documents about community distribution, school distribution, the planning stages. And then we have the steps of the distribution process. So macro planning, micro planning, logistics, social and behavior change communication, distribution, supervision, M&E, training, and then we have a number of case studies that didn't fall under any one category, but which we've grouped here. And as with the rest of the toolkit, you can click on these sections and they will expand. So here we've clicked to expand guides, and we've clicked also to expand the macro planning section. The guides are available for the most part in English and in French. We are working to translate the entire toolkit into French so that it is navigatable by francophones, and trying to get more resources up in French as well. So the guide section has continuous distribution, a guide to concepts and planning, health facility-based distribution guide, school distribution guide, community-based distribution guide. The section on how to conduct a field assessment is here, etc. In the macro planning section, we have some overall implementation strategies that are here. Strategy design for Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, South Sudan. All of the pilots that were done under networks had implementation strategies, and so in the macro planning section, we have these, and as with a number of other tools. So frameworks for describing distribution mechanisms, strategy matrix template, which is kind of a fill in your channels and figure out how they fit together. Lots of different tools. So we are still working on the best way to organize these and label them so that it's clear what tools are what. But if you want to just get a bunch of documents on macro planning, you can download these, look at them, get a sense of what might be useful for you, and how that fits into the rest of the planning process. So here we are scrolling down in this section, looking below macro planning. We have micro planning, so micro planning templates for school distribution, primary school format, micro planning, and a secondary school sheet. Then we have logistics tools, so waybills and stock sheets, risk assessments, sample transport plans, planning for storage, delivers recommendations for packaging and how to deal with bed net packaging, and sample storage plans as well. And then so on and so forth down through the sections here. So that is the brief tour of the website itself. Obviously, you feel free to click around in the website itself. We are welcoming feedback on the structure, how easy it is to find the stuff that you need. If there are tools or resources missing that you'd like to see, please let us know so that we can try and identify those and get them up. If you have your own resources that have been useful or that you don't see listed here, we also would welcome your recommendations on adding those, and we're happy to do that. So we'll turn it over for questions at this point. I think we might be able to scroll.
You just have one so far.
Back. We have Otto. Is Otto on?
He was.
Otto was on. Sarah was on. But we can answer some questions. I know David had a couple.
I'm going to pull up the website.
Back earlier. Yes. Okay. So for David's question on experience with CD in private religious schools or just public sector schools, we do have experience in both. So the school distribution in Ghana, I believe, targets both private and public schools. They are both managed under the Ministry of Education. But it will depend a little bit on the structure of the Ministry of Education and whether or not they have jurisdiction over all of the schools or only over the public schools. The quantification for that distribution should, reflect where you're going to distribute. So if there are a lot of private schools, your reach with that channel will be diminished if you only use public schools. And maybe Seekst is weighing in on this. Going down in the chat box to find the next question from David. So has implementation of NetCalc been evaluated recently to ensure NMCPs and partners are using it effectively and to see if any tweaks are needed? So yes, when Albert Killian was in Tanzania last summer, we used NetCalc as part of the Keep Up strategy planning process there, and we discovered some bugs just in the program itself that we were able to fix, as well as a calculation error in the way that NetCalc calculates population access to nets. So NetCalc provides two coverage indicators in its outputs. One is ownership of at least one ITN, and the other is proportion of the population with access to an ITN. So this was fixed in version 3.2 of NetCalc. So if you are using NetCalc, it's really important to use version 3.2 because the population access indicator in the previous versions is not as accurate in the earlier versions.
He went back up.
And Otto's back. Right.
Just you moved it back up. There was questions at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we still have some more work to do to see if NMCPs are effectively using NetCalc. We have done a number of trainings within Tanzania, certainly, and Otto can maybe speak to other trainings that we've done in NetCalc and how other countries are using that. Otto, do you want to go ahead?
Should be.
Otto, you might need to turn your microphone on so it's green. Okay, we'll come back to Otto once he's back on. All right, so just moving down to the next question from David. Are there CD-related process indicators suggested for evaluation purposes? I believe there are, and they would be in the M&E section. But off the top of my head, I can't list them for you. So if you don't see what you're looking for in the toolkit, and Rebecca's going to the website now from our end, I believe we have M&E plans listed as examples, but they may be primarily for household surveys. Yes, household surveys for the pilots, and then some ANC and EPI monitoring things. So that might be a gap that we could address, or that if you have tools that you're aware of, we can add those.
And then Seek says that warehousing and storage are important components of CD management. They should be listed among the 12 steps. Yes, so they are included in the logistics section, storage and transport and warehousing. I haven't read through all of these documents, so I believe the storage plan does have, warehousing as a component in addition to, smaller storage recommendations. But again, if you see something and it's not what you are looking for, please do let us know. All right, and then Jessica Butts has a question. For the WHO recommendation about shifting from mass campaigns to CD and the need for programs to track coverage over time, is there an implication that this would entail more frequent data collection beyond the periodic household surveys? Are there specific ideas of how this would be done? Yeah, so this is something that we have been discussing in the context of the Tanzania Keep Up strategy, where they are moving to school distribution on an annual basis in 14 regions going forward in order to maintain coverage. Tanzania's Keep Up strategy includes a Plan B mass campaign when population access falls below 50%. So it is important to monitor on at least an annual basis, maybe every 2 years, how the coverage is doing in each of the regions of Tanzania. And we can't do a household survey at the regional level every year. So we're exploring ways to do more rapid monitoring so that we can get a sense of whether that 50% threshold has been met. One of the options that we have to do that is an LQAS style approach, where the region is sampled in an LQAS manner, and then you get a yes or no answer whether the region has fallen below that 50% threshold or whether they are above or at the 80% threshold where you want your universal coverage targets to be. So you don't get a point estimate of where your coverage is, but you would get a yes or no answer. Are you below that threshold where you need to do a mass campaign, or are you doing as expected in reaching your universal coverage targets? So we're hoping to try out that approach and compare it to an upcoming MIS. We will see how that goes, but I think there is some effort needed to figure out how to do rapid monitoring that's not cost prohibitive. And then Seeks has a question, or your illustration with school distribution runs every 2 years. This seems too close given the ITN life of 3 years. We're targeting class 2 and class 4 here in Ghana. Shall we change our targeting? We are looking at ways to combine mass campaigns with school distribution. One challenge with doing school or community-based distribution in between mass campaigns is that you're keeping up your coverage really high, and then when the mass campaign comes along, you're effectively replacing nets that are relatively new from those distribution channels. Now, if we want to keep up our coverage really high, there is some inherent oversupply, as has been described in Sam Bott's paper in the last couple of years. And some level of oversupply in these systems may be needed in order to meet those targets for universal coverage. If we want to avoid oversupply, then we really need to try and tailor the approach so that we deliver the right number of nets at the right time. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Seeks, but I think we have done some thinking about how to optimize Ghana's distribution strategy, and I think there's more conversations that we can have. I don't know. Acho is Acho
He's back
available?
I'm not sure his microphone is working.
All right. We're just having some trouble with Acho's microphone, unfortunately. He's well versed in these issues. Oh, I see. So in terms of the selection of the classes in Ghana, Yeah. So one of the things to consider in the class selection, and that we thought about in Ghana in particular, class 2 was chosen because class 1 in Ghana is relatively unstable in terms of enrollment. So class 1 children are joining school, but then maybe dropping out throughout the year. And class 2 enrollment is relatively more stable, and so you can use that enrollment figure to calculate fairly confidently the number of nets that you would need for later in the year. I think originally we had targeted class 5 in Ghana, and I'm not sure how that changed or when it changed. But yeah, the general idea was to space out net delivery in Ghana so that you would not have too many nets concentrating in the same households over time, but that households would kind of age into nets periodically as their children grow up. So a woman gets pregnant, she gets a net. In Ghana, the EPI net is delivered at the 18-month measles booster. So that's roughly 2 years later. And then the child enters school when the child is 5 or 6 or 7. And then as they go through school, they get some nets. So there are some, there's no concrete best way to select the classes. The number of nets that goes into the community is really the best way to determine that. But we also know that class enrollment drops off as the children age, and as they get to the end of primary school, there are slightly fewer of them than at the beginning. So you get more nets into a community by targeting some of the younger classes than if you choose, say, class 1 and class 6, or just class 4 and class 6. So it's not totally obvious, but lots of things to think about there. Sorry about the technical difficulties here with Sarah and Otto's connections. It's frustrating not to have them on because they are really good resources on this topic and have done these assessments and technical assistance for CD in a lot of different places. So, but you can consider them as resources, offline as needed as well. Other questions? I see maybe a couple people are typing.
Still muted.
Oh, okay. So some people had requested to share this with NMCPs and implementing partners. Obviously, the website is live. Please share it. We have recorded the webinar, and the webinar will be available as well. But any feedback that you have or feedback from your partners in country is very welcome. We want to make this as useful as possible as we go forward. And there's a lot of information. There's a lot of examples and resources that we need to organize as well. So ways to make that most useful for you are really welcome. David's question: is there experience with countries providing routine nets through pediatric outpatient and inpatient clinics? Some countries have included this in their national distribution policies, wondering if this has been looked into for future CD support beyond ANC and EPI. I know that we have talked about this in a few places. I am not sure that I am aware of any specific examples of giving nets out through the outpatient and inpatient clinics. NetCalc does include a box to tick for a curative care channel, where you would estimate, the proportion of kids or people, whoever your target was, that would be coming in for curative care, and then if you were to give them a net every time, how many nets would that be? We haven't used it in any of the countries I'm aware of, and I think there's potential for oversupplying to the same households over and over again that may not need a net if they're in a malarious area and they just keep contracting malaria. You'd have to take that into account. But if there's a way to say, you know, do you need another net? And you would believe them when they told you that they did or didn't. That is definitely an option for targeting nets to households that clearly would need them if they didn't have enough.
Otto said to say that Ghana is actually doing grades 2 and 6, not 2 and 4. Okay. Just it's not needed. Just to clarify.
Okay. So Ghana, Otto says that Ghana is grades 2 and 6, which does spread out those nets a little further apart into the households. Liberia is doing delivery of the nets for A and C, and then at delivery if the woman delivers in the health facility. So that's sort of like pediatric inpatient, if you want to think about it that way. But yeah, I think the quantification for that would need to be looked at. Zanzibar has been doing, as part of their community net distribution, there's a eligibility criteria for if the household is identified during an active or reactive case detection visit. So if somebody comes into the clinic in Zanzibar, they test positive, they follow back to their house, and I think their household members are tested. If anybody's positive, they get treated. Households within a certain radius are also treated. But if the household doesn't have enough nets, the reactive case detection team issues them a coupon. Then they can go, pick up an extra net with that coupon at the health facility. So that's a way also to target nets to households in elimination settings that would need them based on their malaria risk. And then Seek's notes, great. Yeah, Madagascar was discussing how to give nets to children and outpatient. We could check in with them and see if they've moved forward with that. Great. All right. Any other questions or comments that you want to give, right now as you're looking at it on the website? I know everybody's really busy, backed up after a wonderful week of World Malaria Day activities. So we are going to be having another webinar on Tanzania's continuous distribution system at the end of May. We'll be sending out an announcement and a sign up in the next few days or so. I think the last week of May is when that's scheduled. So to put in a plug for that, the Tanzania team, George Greer, Wazir Nyoni from our VectorWorks office. We're hoping that NCP and Simba Logistics, who's the Logist Transport partner, will be joining us, and we'll go through in a lot more detail Tanzania process, how they've moved away from mass campaigns, what that has entailed in terms of, political discussions and discussions within the Ministry of Health, as well as the technical aspects of that and the monitoring and evaluation that they've done to demonstrate to donors that this makes sense for them. And then we'll talk through about, how their school distribution is set up and how it's implemented. So there'll be a lot of great, lessons learned and examples and opportunity to ask questions of the Tanzania team at the end of May. So stay tuned for that.